So let me try and tell you what I've just experienced. Hello everybody. Today, courtesy of channel fan and good guy Lee, I finally get to live a childhood dream. I am driving a Noble, specifically a 2004 Noble M400. So, what do I know about Noble? Well, it was founded by a chap called Lee Noble, a very clever automotive engineer who's the brains behind the Ultima, a car you may have also heard of, one of the fastest kit cars you'll ever buy. He decided to go out on his own and build his very own car and car company. The original Noble was the M10, but they made only a handful of those before releasing the M12. That was an almost instant hit, and thanks to some starring roles on BBC's Top Gear, caught the imaginations of many, including myself. The original M12 went through a few different iterations: the M12 GTO, the GTO 3R with a larger 3-litre engine, and then this, the M400. All of them are generally related, this being of course the ultimate version. All of the M12 line were powered by Ford's Duratec V6, however they were not particularly standard. So this car is a 3-litre item, has 2 turbochargers, slightly bigger I think than the old 3R. It makes a total of 425 horsepower and 390 pound-foot of torque. That is ample shove to propel a less than 1100 kilo car down the road and up to 60 miles an hour in just over 3 seconds. What made the Noble so special though wasn't just the way that they went, it was the way that they felt. They were apparently Lotus-like in their handling, their steering feel, and shamed many a much more expensive car, drawing comparisons with the Ferraris of the time, Porsches of the time, etc, etc. However, these early cars are quite compromised. This is absolutely tiny inside. It feels very much like a sort of TVR come Lotus Elise hybrid. Noble knew that he couldn't just build cars like that, so he had plans for something a little bit grander that really could take on Ferrari and Porsche and play the more daily drivable role. The first plan was for something called the M14, which as I understand it was largely one of these but reworked. However, it was decided for various reasons the M14 was too much of an engineering compromise, so they came out with the M15. A few people drove that, including some that I know, and they all said it's one of the best cars they've ever experienced. Interior quality was much better than the earlier cars. The engine was then turned around and mounted longitudinally rather than transverse as it is here, and that should have been a car that would have done very, very well. Lee Noble joins a very, very long line of engineering geniuses who were not so good when it came to the business side of things, and Noble was soon taken out of his control. Things went a little bit squiffy, and they later came out with the M600, which I believe is based on the M15 but with a rather different engine powering it, a Volvo Yamaha unit V8 with some turbos on. Those were a hell of a lot more money, closer to £300,000 than £30,000. Mr. Noble is now no longer involved with the company, and amongst the owners that I know, he does have a reputation for being a colourful individual who has very definite opinions about certain things, and maybe one day I'd like to get him on the channel and get his side of the story and how things went down. But before I do that, I really want to experience what it is that he actually created. So first impressions of the car. Well, it is really, really tiny in here. It doesn't seem or feel exceedingly well put together. There is almost no storage space. You have a very, very small little felt pocket down there. You've got a little bit of space behind the seats, and that's it. Up the front you'll find radiators and fans, and out the back of course you will find an engine. Now the general cycle of Noble ownership tends to follow a fairly predictable pattern. Man buys Noble. Man finds out Noble not particularly reliable, so man upgrades part of Noble that was broken. Then he realizes that because he's upgraded said part, he can now run a bit more power. But with more power, he finds out the rest of the car isn't actually quite up to the task. So something else breaks and the cycle continues. And you find people that have owned these cars for years and years and years, and in that time they've upgraded it a significant amount, but not actually ever used or driven it. This is reasonably standard. It has an M15 specification engine in the back, and it puts out about 440 horsepower rather than the original 425. So it's as close to standard as you're probably ever going to find. The M400 was designed as pretty much the most hardcore of all the original variants, but even so, at low speeds, I don't think I've even lit the turbos up yet, it's actually very well behaved, very nicely composed, and I can see where Lotus comparisons come from. But it should be quite quick. Let's find out. It is! Oh, very long throttle pedal, much like a TVR, because that is your traction control. Our road conditions today are quite mixed, with quite a few damp patches out there. It's very misty, as I'm sure you can see, and so I'm going to be taking quite a bit of care, because beyond power steering, there are no driver aids whatsoever. Christ almighty, this is fast. Really fast. The 400 in the name comes from its power to weight ratio, 400 brake horsepower per ton. That is a lot. Wonder what the turning circle's like. The gearbox is a little bit reluctant on occasion, but when it's playing ball, it's actually quite nice. Very short throw, very deliberate. Yeah, first, second, third, fourth, they're actually not so bad. Getting into reverse this morning was a bit of a faff, but I did find it in the end. Visibility is actually not so bad. Rearwards, completely useless. Forwards is very good. You've actually got this feeling of being really sat on the road. It's got a bit of a Group C racer vibe. Allegedly, this windscreen's actually off a Lotus Elan M100. Not sure how true that is, but there we go. Right, I'm in third gear, and I'm going to leave it in there. We're going to stretch his legs a little bit, because it doesn't seem to be geared too long. Find out what she's like. Okay, and I'll put her in the middle of the road, just for safety's sake. Oh, yes! Oh, I like this car quite a bit. The ride is definitely on the firm side, but the suspension reacts pretty quickly. Double wishbone front and rear. The whole thing's a steel tubular chassis with these fiberglass panels on it, and it's built by High-Tech Automotive in South Africa, Port Elizabeth specifically. They're the same people who now build the Superformance GT40s. And if you lift the clams off this car, front and rear, it does look a little bit GT40-esque under there. It's not particularly advanced, but there's nothing really wrong with a simple solution if it works. I will be honest and say I'm just exercising a bit more caution than I normally would, because there are only 265 section tyres on this thing, and I'd hope by now this mist would have sort of burnt off, but apparently not. However, the turbos come in a little bit more progressively than you might expect, so it's not super spiky. It's actually somewhat linear in power delivery, and having that long travel throttle pedal is really quite nice. Brakes, they've got that real classic, very TVR kind of feel, race car feel, where the pedal's quite firm, but they're really progressive, really very nice. Clutch is quite easy. Steering is genuinely really quite good. I think it's fair to say that this is a car which is full of quirks and features. For example, this is as far down as this window will go. The wing mirrors will move on their own, and they're both manual anyway. There's windy windows too, and the driving position is very, very awkward. Your feet are kind of down like that. And because there is this bar running across the bottom, there's nowhere comfortable for your foot to rest when it's not doing something, which means after only a very short time in here, you do start to get achy legs. That's something I've never really experienced in a car before. And one of the things about Nobles, one of the many reasons I've not actually bought one previously or even test-driven one, is that they've actually held their money really quite well. So these were between 40 and 60,000 pounds, give or take, when they were new. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. And this one also, it must be one of the earliest M400s around, because my research told me this is sort of 2007 thing, but actually this car was made in 2004, with I think many of them then coming out 2005, 2006. When it comes to anything sort of real proper low volume bespoke like this, finding build records and accurate production numbers and details can be tricky, because the truth is, a lot of the times, those numbers and records were simply never kept. So this guy's owner, Lee, does actually have two Nobles. He first bought an M12 GTO 3R because, like me, he'd seen these on Top Gear and thought, yeah, you know what, I really, really want me one of those. He went and bought a car, and it turned out to not be in anywhere near the condition he was promised. So he took it to a specialist, and they said, look, it's going to cost a heck of a lot of money to put this car right. So he said, okay, all right, well, let's sort of fix it up a bit and sell it, but really, maybe I should invest the money in buying just a better car to start off with. So he bought this. And it then turned out that what he thought was just a turbo seal that had gone was in fact an engine that was down on compression. Hence this now running the M15 unit. I have, at several points in the past, had Nobles offered to me, and if somebody out there's got one that they feels different or interesting to try, please do drop me a line. The details of how to do that will be in the description down below. There are several reasons I haven't actually driven one previously. Either it's just not worked out because of logistics, or they've sold the car, or it's broken, something like that. There's lots and lots of things have been going on. And I was so worried that we would miss today's filming because we're currently in the midst of what seems to be the stupidest fuel crisis in the history of man. The clutch has a very high biting point. You've also got the tiniest dead pedal in the history of the world. It's that, basically, just to the left of the clutch. The steering wheel is an unusual item, bits of carbon fibre on it, bits of leather. The whole thing is really, really quite tiny and thin. And overall build quality in here, very kit car feeling. It also smells of hot oil. And I think if you were the sort of person that was thinking you'd be able to buy, say, a Ferrari 430 Scuderia on a budget with this, no, it doesn't feel like that at all. I will draw some comparisons with the Scuderia because really that's what Noble owners were doing at the time. And in terms of pace, this is right up there. The engine feel, of course, is very different. You know, one has natural aspiration, one has turbos. The Scuderia also feels like a cocktail lounge inside by comparison. Yes, both have a fairly basic interior, with the Scud actually having no carpets at all. This has got something basic and lots of Alcantara everywhere, but the Ferrari is a much bigger car. There's loads more room in it. This genuinely is kind of Elise-like on the interior space. Compared with the 430, it doesn't make a particularly nice sound, although I do enjoy the fact that at low speeds it has this sort of crack and burble that doesn't feel in any way artificial. This particular car does have stainless steel manifolds on it, and I think it has a Roush exhaust. Roush, curiously, were the people who actually built the later engines, including this one. One of the really curious bits I found when I was researching this car is that one of the changes over the older GT03R is that this actually has an anti-roll bar on it. We're not sure if it's got one at the back, but it definitely has one at the front, and the 3R did not, nor did any of the other M12s. The reasoning being, I believe, is that the car simply didn't need it. I have known a few cars where if they're light enough and the suspension's set up right, the engineers have said an anti-roll bar becomes simply unnecessary. This car, though, because it had more of a track focus, got one because it was decided that it would be better that way, I guess. This particular car currently has just under 40,000 miles on the clock. There is another one up for sale at the moment in similar sort of specification. It's a dark grey, and that's up for sale privately at about £58,000. So in practice, these haven't really lost any money at all over when they were new. I can see exactly why not a lot of people would have bought into them, because, you know, if you compare it to, say, a Porsche at the time, it's quite coarse, it's quite basic in here. It does really have this sort of kit car vibe. There is a stereo. You can't reach it. That's it, I can't. This has both a 3-point and a harness in it, so you can choose between the two. Really, if you're on the road, use the 3-point, and if you're on track, you're going to use the harness. There are no airbags or anything. Your safety comes from the fact that the car does actually have a roll cage in it. That's a roll cage. Not so sure I like it being that close to my head, and actually if I had a helmet in, I'd be a bit stuck in here. The M400 also has different seats over the older cars, apparently much better, much nicer, much more comfortable, and in a much better, more natural position. Pedals, actually, the pedal box is pretty good. There's reasonable amount of space between them, not massive, so you can, if you want to, just about heel and toe. If anything, I'd say there's maybe a bit too much space between the brake and the throttle. I got my Pilottis on today, and some cars these are actually a bit too wide for. Not this one. Generally speaking, I'm actually impressed with the refinement, the volume in the cabin too. I thought it'd be really, really raucous and loud, and actually, for just generally driving about, no, it probably is better than the Scuderia, actually. The Scud steering, by Ferrari standards, is actually excellent. Not all Ferraris have good steering, but the Scuderia does. That's quite unusual. This maybe is... I'm still working out whether it's similar or not quite as good. It's going to be one of those two. I don't think it's better than the Scuderia, but the Scuderia is a high point of Ferrari steering, so there's no shame in this not being better. Actually, a very TVR-like sound out of this. Does sound like a Speed 6 a bit. More straight 6 than V6, I would say. So the Evora had, you know, a bit of a howl. And that actually would be an interesting car to draw a comparison with as well. Much more livable, and indeed I believe Lee eventually wants to change one of his Nobles for an Emira. And I can see why, because that is a car that you can really use on more of a day-to-day basis. It's got more space in it, it's comfortable, it'll have technology in it that works, etc, etc. Creature comforts, you know, luxury, lad, luxury. Yeah. Reverse ears, push it all the way over, sort of BMW style. It's a 6-speed Getrag, so it probably is a BMW lump. Alright, let's give it some beans. Not in first, start with second. Oh, you could get it wrong in this car real quick. Well, this is not quite what I expected, so I've now managed to give it the big one. It's terrifying. This doesn't behave at all like I thought, so let me try and tell you what I've just experienced. At low speeds, nice, lovely, composed, delicate, balanced, wonderful, very confidence-inspiring, but you get your boot in, and it goes down the road at a hell of a rate, but the front becomes so light, so incredibly light. The feel, it doesn't so much disappear from the steering like in a Boxster, but what you sense is that the steering is accurately telling you there's not a lot of grip at the front anymore. You go to then brake and all it wants to do is straighten itself out. I've also just noticed that the little gator, which is basically just a piece of fabric around the bottom of the gear lever, has air being blown into it constantly, so it's like feeling a balloon, a really, really hot balloon. That's weird. It's really weird. So you find yourself piling towards a corner. You start to make small adjustments to the steering only to realise it's not doing anything anymore. And you think, okay, clearly I'm now going too fast. I mean, the speed at which these needles move around is quite something. But you then go, okay, too fast. Pile on the brakes and it just straightens out completely, which is a bit daunting. That sort of vagueness from the front end is really the kind of thing you would find with an Elise or sometimes an Exige, although they tend to be a little bit better because they're bigger front boots. However, that's a problem that the Evora never really had, and it's one of these odd cases, I think, where certainly on the road, actually having a bit more weight in a car probably helps it. It certainly makes it feel like a much safer thing to drive. You've got a lot more confidence in the front end. But fortunately, the Noble does talk to you enough that as long as you're aware of what you're doing, your abilities and the cars, you shouldn't get into too much trouble without having had a fair warning first. Now, in fairness, the Scuderia, with its present tyres, which are 6-year-old Pirelli P0 Corsas, would not be particularly brilliant on a day like today either, but I know it's dry enough out there, that shouldn't be an issue. Out the way, Pidgey. Now, what's interesting is, as the road has dried throughout the course of this review, I've been able to get a little bit braver with the throttle. And there is turbo lag in this car, there most definitely is, but because it has so little weight to it, there's no inertia here, and because you're always being fairly judicious with the application of the throttle, in effect the turbo lag doesn't really matter because you're only ever asking the car to feed the power in fairly progressively. So it all actually kind of works. This is an exercise in restraint. I often say about some cars that would they pass the 21-year-old test? You know, if you had a car and it was a sensible 21-year-old, you know, sensible, reliable, dependable, level-headed, if they asked you for a go, would you trust them? Would you let them? So, to give you an example, R8, yes I would. Ferrari 355, no I wouldn't. Ferrari F8, yes I would. Noble, no. Not a chance in hell, sunshine. You buy your own and you break your own neck. I apologise for all the blaspheming in this video, but this really is an unholy car. Not at all what I expected. Quick, yes. And on a track, when you can get that aero working, get the tyres properly warm, it's probably as devastating as you imagine. But on a British B road, I'm building confidence with it, but I'm always keeping one eye on it. I've got to say though, no creaks or rattles in here. Very, very impressed by that. So there we go. That at long last is a childhood dream made real. Huge thank you to Lee for putting the faith in me to take his car out. Really, seriously, thank you very much, good sir. Thanks to you for watching. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.